Welcome everyone to the meeting of the State Board of Elections here on, what is it, July 25th, 2019. I'm Peter Kaczynski. To my right is Commissioner Doug Kellner. To his right is Commissioner Spano. And to my left is Commissioner Peterson. And first order of business today is to take up the minutes from the June 6th and June 27th meetings.
I move the adoption of the minutes as proposed.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Those are carried. We'll begin the meeting then with unit updates. We'll start with the executive, Bob Bremen, Todd Valentine.
We're still working, you know, as you'll see by that board meeting, we're still working on getting the regulations in place that relate to a lot of the activities for early voting. And you'll also see that we're still dealing with the expenditures related to the budget materials, which we can talk about under the separate item. You know, in the meantime, you know, the primary has been mostly completed, but not final everywhere. New York City is still engaged in its close election for the Queen's District Attorney. We are in the process when they talk about, from election operations, the necessary activities to certify the roll calls for the judicial conventions, which will be the next order of activity. Those start August 8th through the 14th, and then certificates of nomination are due on the 15th. So while it seems like we have a free summer, we really don't. So, and then I usually steal the thunder of every other unit, so I'm actually not going to try that today. Let other units speak. Bob?
I think it's been a busy season. We're up to 21 chapter laws have been signed this year, amending something in the election law. There are 29 more that passed both houses of the legislature and are pending transmittal to the governor's office. We watch daily to see what's gone over. Just to see if there are any election-related bills. To this morning's check, there are a number pending, but none related. A number pending in the governor's office, none related to the election law yet. So, so while that's very busy, there's a certain number that are still coming our way that will require further review and work of people here. Our staff that we put together with the assistance of NYS is busy looking through this group of bills and identifying which will require additional resources in order to accomplish. One of the bills that was passed was the online registration, and in many conversations that we've had either with Division of Budget in person on the phone or with representatives of the chamber, who our Deputy Secretary and others, had indicated that the state board should come up with a plan to implement online registration and the other things that touch it, and give them a plan to identify within the existing state budget, not our budget, but the existing state budget, funds to implement that plan. So we do have a good team that's working on putting a plan together. Our estimate on when that plan will be developed to deliver to the chamber is, well, I think we estimate it'll be ready for August 9th, somewhere around there. So we're looking to schedule that meeting. And then hopefully they'll identify funds to actually implement the plan. We're also looking use that effort for what our budget will be for the next fiscal year, what resources we're going to need going forward. So we're assuming the whole list of 50 items, the ones that are chaptered and the others, could be considered. So for planning purposes, we're assuming they will be signed and that we'll have to do something for them. And right now we're looking at, you know, which of the chapters require, say, only the county board to do something, which would require the state board to do something. And if we have to do something, is it, you know, try and put it into a category of what is our estimate, is a big lift, a small lift? Does it require an IT solution? Does it require regulations? Does it require, you know, what unit in the building would take the lead on it. So from a planning purpose, that's where we're at. Certainly, the only other major, or the other major issue for a status is probably the risk assessments reports that are coming out of Grant Thornton, our vendor. We have somewhere the number of 25 county reports that are drafted that between our support staff in the building, the Secure Election Center, and the consultants, NYS, we're providing feedback to the vendor. Our next status call is tomorrow. One of the items that we requested the vendor do is to give us their summary report that kind of looks at trends throughout the state. It was like, it's the last deliverable on the list, but because we're getting close to trying to figure out next steps and budget, we wanted it, instead of giving it to us, right now the estimate would have been September, we asked them to give it to us early. And we just got a draft of that report on Friday. So
when you say trends, what do you refer
well, how many
to?
counties have this problem? Is it an issue that is a one-up in a county, or is it across, the spectrum of counties? Is it small counties, big counties? So we just got that report, and we're trying to review it in-house, but also our original plan, once we got that report, was to assemble the same kind of group that we met with to make the original plan. Homeland Security, the Governor's Task Force on Cyber Security, various stakeholders who are familiar with cybersecurity issues, and looking at this list of items, how would they prioritize where we should start with the resources we have, and then also to make the case for where are there other resources to fill that gap, because we don't have that many dollars left to do cybersecurity at all. But of the limited resources we do have, what's the best bang for the buck based on this assessment?
So
So
you're saying they've completed 25 counties?
They've done all of the board visits, and now it's a matter of writing up the reports. And the reports are looking at thousands of artifacts within a county, depending on their size, but a lot of records to come up with a report that gives information in a way that it has to kind of cross, it's the county IT director, but the Board of Elections, and also a little bit, the county executive, county manager kind of, and they all kind of speak a different language of cyber understanding. So it's and also the work that we had with NYS was kind of our quality control. Are we missing any of the things that are in there that need to be pointed out in this report? So over the next month, we should have those pretty well finished so that we can share them with the county, have a discussion with the county, what do they mean, and then where are we at for the next steps. And our plan was whatever money we have left is to help them mitigate the list of problems, and then since we have limited dollars, how do we best target them? Do we pay for, an example, do we pay for, here are the biggest risks, and we will pay to fix those biggest risks? If your county doesn't have one of those, maybe we'll get you on the next round. Or do we look at every county and pay for a per capita amount of items on their list so that everybody gets raised? I think we only have about $2.5 million left to spend, so I don't know either one of those is where I think no matter what we do, it's not going to be enough, so we really want to get the input of some people who have a cyber perspective.
You say $2.5 million left from what?
Oh, good. From the state and federal cyber dollars. We've, in that plan, we've identified a certain amount of spending for the intrusion detection services that are in every county now, except 2 that we're still working on. We have, managed security services that we're rolling out as part of that contract. We did the original 4 counties that are pilot counties. We're doing the next 12, and so far 30 counties have said we want this. That was a voluntary program. So 30 counties will have the managed security services.
We did the risk assessments.
And then we're doing the risk assessments.
And then we've also provided a baseline cyber hygiene training to every county board in the state, including us.
And some of the money this week and next week, the federal Homeland Security is doing free for the state of New York, for the State Board of Elections, our risk assessment. So some of that money we've identified as what we anticipate will need to be fixed once they do their exit interview with us next Friday. And then on top of that, there's about $2.4 million in federal funds. There's a little bit of state funds, but one of the resolutions that you'll be asked to consider today is requesting to use that money for some of the day-to-day expenses. I think that will cover us partially through the end of the fiscal year. I anticipate, once we get through the next quarter, a better assessment, and we may come back to you and with a recommendation that we transfer more of that money to pay day-to-day expenses, just to get us through this fiscal year. So that's why there might be a little bit more state cyber money, but right now, I think we have to be cautious with that, because I think we need that just to get to the end of the state fiscal year. I don't know if that's good news or bad news, but I hope I answered your question.
Answer the question, is that there really is no money for this. In other words, it's going through us to the local county boards to rescue them, really, and there's not enough money for that, plus what we need.
And I think one of the best...
So to say that there's $2.5 million or $2 million is not really there for us to spend.
The 2.5 is because it's the federal money.
Yeah, but I understand, but it's, again, there's too much to do. It's gonna be spread so thin, it's gonna be totally ineffectual.
Well, that,
And the state really has to, hey, belly up.
and I think from the trends that we've been looking at, is how do you protect election infrastructure that the computer systems, the infrastructure that you're protecting, are just part of the overall county infrastructure. You know, the state law, and one of the issues that makes us a little stronger from a security perspective with regard to voting machines is they're not part of any other network. They're isolated. There are only 5 counties in the state of New York that have some level of segmentation or isolation of the voter registration system infrastructure. So even if we came out review and said, we ought to isolate voter reg systems like we do voting machines, that's expensive, and it would take us a long time to be able to take them out and set up a separate system. You know, if it were one of those risk assessments that came back and said half are already done, we only have half to do. But they are largely all of them. So that means, you know, if we're going to do regulations, if we said any of the computers that are attached to NYS Voter need to be up to date and patched, well, that's just about every computer in a county, because it's not isolated. So there's a number of things that we have to, that we will get out of this report, that we will come back to you and say, based on this, here's what we recommend as early regulations.
So the real bad news is gonna come after we do the risk assessment.
I think September's meeting would probably be a bigger list, because I think by then we will have the report, we'll have the panel that looks at it, but it's helping us to get close to the next budget submission. I think it will build the case why, you know, here's what we have, and you know, short of, you know, there's no way to, you know, at least we can make the case for the next fiscal year. Here's what we need. If we get it, we'll do it. If we don't, we'll have to park the issues.
So I guess that begs the question, what do we do for next year? I mean, you're talking about April of 2020 now as a budgetary cycle, potentially. So you're saying our budgetary commitment this year is pretty much committed. At this point, we're down to $2.5 million left in and as I recall it, there was about $20 million of federal money and another $5 million of state money, ballpark. So you're saying of that 25 million, we're down to about 2.5 left to utilize for cybersecurity purposes in the state for this fiscal year. And this fiscal year includes, as I see it, November's election, which is upcoming, and then next spring, we'll have a presidential primary election in this state in probably, I don't know, they've set those, didn't they?
April 28th.
April 28th.
So,
The following fiscal year.
you know, that's less than a month after the budget would come out next
Mhm.
year. So that would cut us pretty short. So it seems to me the money we have now is the money that we can utilize to safeguard the 2019 general and the 2020 presidential. And next year's budget would be potentially used for future elections. But my concern then is, are we prepared to safeguard this fall's election and the presidential election, or the presidential primary? With the
Well,
current allocations as they
there's a
exist.
slight additional, the state cyber money, there is,
No.
I'm sorry, what's the state?
there's a little bit. The 5 million state
Oh,
money.
5 million, okay.
We've already spent a little over 1 million of that. Today, we're asking you to allocate 1.2 million just to pay the operational expenses of the board, because we can, under that program, do that. And that's the only place that we can just pay, otherwise we're gonna run out of money somewhere around October of this year.
So the short answer is no.
So there might be a little bit more of state cyber money, but I don't recommend we commit that to cyber programs yet, because I think we're gonna have to come back to you in at least the second quarter, maybe the third quarter of the year, to finish closing the gap. And then we still might need a little bit of that money into the next fiscal year just to pay the
So we're
staff.
taking money out of money that was originally allocated for cybersecurity and diverting it to administration of the office. Is that what's?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's why I understood the resolution.
That
today.
is correct.
And you're saying there's a resolution today of 1.2 to do, and you think there'll be more needed to get us through our fiscal year?
Just looking at the forecast with our staff and our IT and what we think will be paid for out of this fiscal year for personal services and contractual services, it's about 2.4 million is my estimate. There was a little bit of reappropriation money that didn't get line item vetoed out because we were a little closer to 3 million at the beginning of the year, of the fiscal year. So there's a little bit of reappropriation money, but also there's a couple of the programs that I think are probably based on the trajectory that we're on are gonna be into the next fiscal year. So I think,
So you think
So I think we're gonna
another
be-
1.2 will have to be diverted?
I think
is that what you
I think to tell you today, this is only a partial addressing of the problem. I expect after the second quarter of the year that we'll give you a further forecast, and either at the second quarter or the third quarter, we will come back to you and have to close what we will estimate is the real gap. I don't know if it could be as high as 1.2 million based on our forecast right now, additional amount of money.
So what confidence level do we have that we are able to address the cybersecurity needs of this state in the current fiscal year?
Well, I think we are going to do as much as we can with the resources we have, and we're going to make the case why we need additional resources but we've been doing that.
I know.
And what we've submitted in our testimony, the letters we've sent, we've testified before the fiscal committees, before the budget. We always get invited to the assembly. I don't know if the Senate now will do something similar, but we always get invited to a fall public hearing by the assembly on the budget. So we're preparing for that. We don't have a date yet or a subject, but it always covers the budget. So, and we're also preparing what to ask for in the next round. Here's what we have, we've spent it all, and here's our to-do list.
Well, I mean, is there more money? I guess the budget has been set, the budget's been passed, the budget's done. Is there an opportunity, is there a fund, is there an access to any more money for this agency to assist in the cybersecurity measures?
We're asking for in the presentation on August 9th, the budget that I mentioned first. these items are also on that list related to the to-do list that we have. If they get, I'm not familiar with,
Bob,
That
hasn't
answer-
the governor's office told you that they will provide resources from other agencies as necessary?
they said that to us on a
But
few
they haven't.
occasions. The most recent telephone call we had with them was somewhere on July 3rd or 2nd. Some division of budget people suggested that it would have to come out of the next fiscal year. But I don't know that that is a definitive answer yet. The in-person meetings that we have had with representatives of and the chamber said give them a plan and they would look for resources out of this year's budget to help us get through what we need to spend this year. So that's what we've been working towards. Until they tell us no, that's the plan we're on.
Aren't you glad now that you brought up the fiscal situation to us?
Well, I think we have.
Oh, no,
We
no,
have
no,
I'm
repeatedly.
teasing, but the bottom line is, the
It's the worst part of our day to try and figure out how to just keep the lights on.
the reason for the line of questioning, obviously, is this, it concerns all of us, and I think we're all concerned about it, because, we don't have the money. And we're talking about cybersecurity, and that's a huge topic throughout the state, throughout the country, for that matter. And we can't be caught short, simple as that. And we're doing the best we can here, and this is not for you or anybody else, this is for whoever's watching this thing, hopefully the governor. We have to look at this thing and say, hey, are we going to be serious about this? Because if you are, you have to support it. And that costs money, plain and simple. And you can't leave either this board or all the boards throughout the state of New York, the county boards, high and dry. If there's a mess up somewhere along the line, our whole voting system can be, questioned. And that is unacceptable. And the only thing more unacceptable is not paying for the upgrades and so forth that are needed to ensure that cybersecurity is solid here.
The only trend that I think we're looking at is to protect the election infrastructure is the entire county system. So let's say we agreed to protect election was, pick a number, 50 million. There's still all of the other threats to the lowest hanging fruit in any county, other than even the 5 that have segmentation. There could be some other threat. But, so that's a bigger lift. In order to protect the election, you have to protect the whole county. Well, that's kind of a big lift for a board of elections of the state to have to. And what's the acceptable level of risk for the other programs? That's where some of the people who do this for a living, a little more than we do, will be in the room in August to help us. What is a managed level of risk that is acceptable and what
And
is.
so that's a decision for the county to make on whether they isolate their election systems from the county system. And of course, a decision that we will have to make is whether we require the counties to take certain actions that may cost them money, but that we have the power to direct them to do it. And I certainly agree that the state ought to fund that, but even if the state doesn't fund it, we could require the counties to do it if we
Well,
think
the
it's
counties are
necessary.
in the same position that the state is in. I mean, they're looking at it with a hat that I used to wear. I mean, you sit there and you get another mandate. It's significant.
Right.
I think we have a couple of things here. One, cybersecurity money is being used for the day-to-day operating expenses, which should be a no-no. 2 is, we've completed the risk assessments, correct? But we're getting our report when?
We just got the draft last Friday to review, so we are having our first status meeting tomorrow just to get feedback on whether or not we think it's.
And our next meeting is
covered.
when?
We haven't scheduled it yet.
We haven't scheduled it yet, but
Okay,
hopefully in
so by the
September
next meeting,
sometime.
we'll have more information in terms of you all running the day-to-day stuff here.
Mhm,
So by the next meeting, we should have the risk assessment
mhm.
that we have here, which will give us a better picture of what kind of money we're talking about. And I think that at that particular point, we'll look at how we address this, and not only in terms of what we say to the counties, but what we say to the state.
Mhm.
Good.
Great.
And I certainly agree with everything Commissioner Dickinson said.
Yeah. So I think we want to be kept up to
Sure.
speed on where this stands. And I agree with the commissioner, I think the concern, the immediate concern today is this resolution to divert money out of cybersecurity, which was dedicated to that at one time, and I know there was a budgetary change this year to allow us to access it, but it was originally dedicated, now we're diverting it for non-cybersecurity purposes, and I think that's raised the concern here.
But it also should be pointed out that those non-cybersecurity issues are issues that have been foisted upon us, or let's say promulgated by the legislature,
Okay.
which has given us numerous tasks that we still have to do.
Not by the legislature. Well, the legislature gave us numerous tasks, but the governor line item vetoed.
Yes, you're right.
And of the total amount of line item vetoes that the governor did, 8% of those line item vetoes fell on the Board of Elections, even though our budget is less than 1/100th% of the whole state budget. So he singled out our agency for these line item vetoes, and there is no plausible explanation that I have ever received that could justify that attack. And those line item vetoes constituted almost 25% of our budget, right?
It was about 1.2%. So of the.
No, of our budget.
Oh, yes.
2 million.
Oh, excuse me, 1.2
What's the
million.
amount of money in those vetoes?
Well, the actual money that was in the account was 1.2 million. The reappropriate language was to the original appropriate.
It's the amount we're transferring today.
Yes,
Yes.
it's almost the same.
So these
So the
funds that
legislature-
we're transferring today, translate directly from the line item vetoes that the governor made of the.
Yep.
So that would have helped us to pay the day-to-day, keep the lights on kind of expenses. It probably would have helped with the 50 new ideas that we have to implement.
Is that along
But then
with
the question is to make the case, how many of
along with
those?
the 1.2 that we got using the cybersecurity money?
I think we have very little money for any new ideas,
No, but I
because we
mean,
can't keep the lights
What
on.
you're saying we could do was that 1.2 extra plus the cybersecurity money would make us whole.
Oh, that would have been very close to making us whole,
But then we would
depending on
still
how we
be using
manage
the
other
cybersecurity
expenses
money.
between now and then.
We'd
Okay.
be using a lot less.
Yeah.
And still have no money for any of the brand-new initiatives.
We got nothing to
Correct.
cover that.
And that's kind of when we saw that all these initiatives were happening. And by the time the budget was adopted, we were up to 14 new ideas that passed and were signed into law. 14 or 15. But there was there were more coming. And I've been doing this a long time, as many of you have been doing this a long time. 50 in 1 year is unprecedented number of changes to the election.
It's a decade worth usually.
So the kinds of questions that would come to council, can you implement this bill, or to IT, can you implement this bill? Would this be a big lift? And in most instances, some of these ideas are not as big a lift, some are bigger lifts. But when you have 49 other cousins that you also have to do at the same time, you need a bigger dining room table for that Thanksgiving meal. And it's hard to, when you're trying to estimate what resources you need to get this job done, and can I roll them all out with these various effective dates, some of these might have to get parked. The risk that somebody might sue us is up there. So council is familiar with that. But we can, what are we going to do? We do the best we can to give the advice to the counties. If we can come up with a temporary workaround, and we are, which is like the transfer bill, we are desperately looking under our forecast that we're putting together. Help really won't arrive by our estimate on many of these items until 2022, according to that schedule. If I can give you the preview of what you'll see next month. So for the counties, we have to put our thinking caps on how best to mitigate as many of these temporary workarounds that they'll have to live through. So one, we're coming up with a plan. If we don't get the money, we're also trying to figure out, are there any other things we can do differently on any of this list that helps to remove the burden on the counties? That's our secondary focus as soon as we get the projection and the budget submitted.
You know, we're all familiar with what happens when you do your budget. You try to do the best you can, and you reach here and you reach there, and you pull money in from one slot to the other slot. And I haven't dealt with the state budget, but I certainly dealt with billions of dollars in another budget. That doesn't mean you can't recover at some particular point. If you learn at any point during the year that you have a major emergency or something big that's, and I suggest we go along just the way we said. Get these reports, take a look at it, let's look at the magnitude of the problem, and then let's deal with it. And I think we shouldn't whisk it under the rug. This is a real problem.
I totally agree. I mean, I think we all recognize that even when the 25 million was allocated to us between federal and state, we weren't sure that was gonna be sufficient to begin with. That was just a guess by the feds and by the state of what we would need, because nobody had a risk assessment done. I think what's troubling today specifically is if the 25 million was enough, we're now diverting some of that to a different use. And, you know, I think we all understand the priorities that cybersecurity has and what we do as elections. And so it's troubling to divert money from our cybersecurity charge to other purposes, but I can see the need to do it. I understand why we're being asked to do it, that it's imperative to keep the agency running. But I think we're in a tough spot, and I think we need to reach out to see if there are ways this can be addressed and should be addressed at the state level to at least make us whole, and maybe even look for more in this arena to help the counties. Because, well, I think we recognize there's a county obligation here. I think there's clearly a state obligation too. Because you're right, it's an unfunded mandate when you start mandating that counties do certain things. And I think segregating, you know, we did it initially with our voter registration system. We kept it separate. That was a decision we made back at the time, but we understood if you make the decision not to do that, to do it later is difficult. It's expensive, time-consuming, difficult to do. So if we were to take the position, counties, you have to segregate because we feel from a security standpoint that's necessary, that's going to be a huge burden on these counties to do that. Plus, it's not going to happen right away. So, you know, we have immediate needs coming up. We have elections every year. Next year, 3 times a year. We have November, and you know, we can't just say, well, we'll do it in 2020, 2021, or whatever. I think we have immediate needs, so I think there are some concerns that deserve immediate attention. I agree. Is that your total report? Okay, are there any other questions for the directors? I assume not. So we'll move on then to Counsel's Office, Kim Galvin and Brian Cloud.
Well, interestingly enough, after that very serious question, my first comment was going to be the new law books are in, and the favorite part of my job is picking the color. So if anybody needs them,
Kudos
let
on
us
the
know.
color.
Yeah, it's a good color. We've been busy working on regulations. They're coming up on the agenda. Litigation is, of course, very busy, and one significant update is on the DeRozier case, on the political apparel case. The magistrate recommended that the case be dismissed, and it's gone to the district court for the ultimate decision. Common Cause, the case regarding the inactive voters, is currently at a settlement conference in New York City. That's where Bill and Nick are. We were served, as we were all meeting, by the Conservative Party and the Working Family Party on the complaints regarding the Public Financing Commission. I haven't read them yet. We've worked with some trouble getting through the FAQs, the frequently asked questions on the time off to vote. People are screaming, amending, no one wants responsibility. So it's a variety. I think we ultimately sent out the final version Friday.
Posted.
Posted.
We posted it before that, but we made adjustments.
Yeah, we had to keep, people were complaining that they were referenced in it, like civil service and things like that, so we had to keep taking them out. So that's there, even though we still don't really understand how that's going to work or who's going to enforce it.
Is the Labor Department also making interpretations of that, or is it
It's a
just us?
very quick whip around, labor to civil service to us and back and there, and
Who's in charge?
I don't know. Yeah, Kim is. Brian is. Kim thinks it's an absolutely ridiculous bill, but Brian is working through trying to figure it out. So we have that going. We have the use of force policy that's coming up for discussion. The PLLC and the LLC forms that these entities are supposed to file with us as of December 31st, setting forth their ownership responsibilities and percentages. We've approved the form and posted it on our website. Those are due 12/31. It is kind of backwards because they're giving contributions now, and
How's compliance with that?
Oh.
Are filers able to comply with that
oh, we love it.
requirement?
Yeah, they love it. They're trying. They're
Yeah.
trying.
I mean, it must be difficult since the LLCs don't have to do their
Right.
filing till the end of the year.
It's very curious, the order
I
of
mean,
things.
are you getting compliance, or are they just?
They're trying to comply.
Okay.
Yes, and kudos to the unit in terms of having given out 3 very detailed compliance documents. So we have given people a good roadmap, and we have resources available to folks to do the compliance.
Although we're getting, so many questions from every range of candidate to business to party committees. Do they have to be broken out, even a $50 contribution? And we're working to create a real way to break them out because we didn't have a system for that. So we're directing them now to the partnership breakouts. But housekeeping committees, everybody is struggling. It's taking up a lot of time. Compliance is reviewing the primary reports and the July periodic reports. Call volume, because those were so close together, is extremely heavy. In addition, the call volume was increased because the enforcement division sent out an email to certain filers on some list that had provided emails, very generic, you are missing a filing, not what filing. So they're calling compliance, and our people are trying to work through, trying to figure out why they got this filing from enforcement, etc. That's, we're continuing to meet our staff with IT regarding various projects. And actually, Mr. Mahoney is here, and we're working on determining a way of, right now we have the 10-day post-primary and the July periodic, and they fall within a very short period of time because the calendar has been moved up to June. So we're trying to work with the calendar, the statute, and the regulations. Certain things require 2 reports before, 1 after, at least 1 every 6 months. So we're trying to, the staff is trying to work through that to see if we can separate those a bit.
Isn't there a rule right now that if you have to file within a certain period of time, you don't have
You're
to
like
do
2
both?
days outside it,
Just 2
or
days.
something like that. It's a very, very close thing.
But we could change that, right?
Right.
Well,
That's
Yes.
a regulation, isn't it?
There's a statutory requirement and a regulatory requirement, and we think that we can amend the regulation to get rid of one of those filings and meet the statute.
but we're still working through that because there's a lot of
Makes sense.
things to do. The seminar season will wrap up in Albany on August 7th with a CLE and a CPE for the accountants in Albany County. And last but not least, on behalf of the unit, they requested me to tell you and to highlight that Marie Woodward, a long-term and beloved employee by the unit, has retired. And she's out living the dream at Glimmerglass and in a show she's been casted for, and she's missed, and we wish her well.
We do.
So that's all I have.
Okay, any
Well,
questions?
And I think we should also point out that Ms. Galvin was appointed to the commission on campaign finance. And I think that's a significant position, and I know that they have no staff. So we are probably the most overwhelmed agency in the state government right now on a per capita basis, but to the extent that the agency can help you with your commission duties.
Well, thank you very much, and
encourage that.
I think that regardless of whether or not it was me or someone else, I think it's very important to have a vocal supporter of the board and what we do, and an understanding of the costs and the processes that work here. So, thank you.
I agree, and I congratulate Kim, by the way, as well, but I think it was important for us to be represented, and we couldn't have a better representative than Kim Galvin, and I will defer, of course, to Leader Kolb in his good judgment in selecting Kim.
Yes, and I will defer to Leader Cole as well. I don't know if it was a blessing or a curse, but we'll see how
And
it
I'm sure you'll
shakes
keep
out.
us apprised of the
I will.
workings of your group. I think you have a short frame. Isn't that a December 1 time frame? You have to have something.
It is, and
completed, so the time is
and
running.
we are not speeding along. So
Well, I noticed you just got appointed.
and
so
we are not speeding along. So
okay.
I will
So
do
see,
my
we have
best
August,
to.
September, after you have 4 months. Right?
Thank you, Commissioner Kaczynski, for
Good luck with that.
instilling in me that little bit of fear. Thank you.
Are you guys? Is that the end of your
Yes.
report, or
I think so.
any other questions for them?
Thank you.
No? Okay, then we'll move on to election operations. Tom Connolly and Brendan LeBeau.
Thank you, Commissioner. As Todd mentioned before, the operations unit has been working with compiling the results from the primary election, largely for the 57th Senate District primary, and also primaries in various judicial districts for the delegates and alternate delegates. As such, we've also been preparing the roll calls to be disseminated to different parties for their conventions. We also amended our certification for the November election twice since our last meeting, due to 2 new vacancies in the 5th and the 7th judicial districts. The most recent went out yesterday. With regard to the voting machines, for ES&S, the secondary source review is still underway by our independent security consultant. We're also working with them, NYS to determine any kind of additional security and functional testing that might be necessary, since this is the first new system that the board has really evaluated in some time. With regard to Dominion, we continue to work with them on some of the additional reporting functionality for the ICE machine and procedures for the county boards to follow. For that, Clear Ballot, which is used for the automated audit, we're finalizing the latest submission, and we look to be scheduling a public test in the near future. And once that's all complete, we will bring that before you for approval. With regard to electronic poll books, obviously the last couple of meetings have been, from our perspective, focused on that. We were doing our work and reviewing and evaluating the various submissions. Since the last meeting, we have been meeting with some of the approved poll book vendors to discuss various logistics as far as their rollout as they go out and try to sell their systems to the counties, talking about an acceptance testing procedure to be followed, default configurations for New York State as far as language. Various oaths are appearing up on the screen, then we want to make sure that they're actually the ones that are New York specific. And so we continue to work with them. We continue to work with one of the other vendors who submitted a system that has not yet been recommended for approval. Later on in the meeting, we will be discussing 2 other items. One is one of the approved vendors, No Inc., had submitted an additional configuration to be approved for use. And one of the other vendors that had previously been approved, NTS, have requested to withdraw their system from the list of approved systems for use in New York State. Otherwise, Brendan went with Jason from our unit and also Jeff Baez from IT. They kind of did a visit to the Albany County Board of Elections on a more secure election center focus, looking at the voter registration system and other processes. I don't know if there's... We continue to work with various counties that we've been kind of pulled in for their assistance, and also vendors. to kind of work out procedures for early voting. That includes not just operation of the machines during the early voting period and also on election day, but also figuring out other processes like election night reporting, to see what kind of options are for reporting that information from the county boards to us. We did perform some acceptance testing for the clear ballot system, the approved clear ballot system in Orange County, and also the machines that were received by Franklin County, which were the Dominion ICE machines. We continue to participate with the Center for Technology and Government, their voter registration data analysis project that we have been working on, and we continue to work with IT on the revisions to the CAPAS program and also to our MOVE system. I don't know.
Excellent. Thank you.
That'll be it for now, yes. Do you have any questions?
Any questions of either Tom or Brett? Okay, thanks. And we will move on to John Conklin, and I believe Cheryl isn't here. So John, you're in charge of having the report on NVRA and PIO.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Commissioner. So the Public Information Unit's been busy since the last board meeting. We've gotten a lot of inquiries, lots of questions on the June primary, inquiries about the interaction of state PACs and federal PACs, when the deadline is for enrollment changes to be effective for next year's presidential primary. We had some questions on polling and the Fair Campaign Code. Lots of questions around the July periodic report and the 10-day post-primary, as Kim mentioned. Questions on when parties should be holding their organizational meetings. Lots of questions about the Queens District Attorney race. What happens if there's a tie vote in a primary. Judicial district delegates and conventions. A lot of people seem to want to run for Congress next year, so we had a lot of questions about what that would be like. Since the local primary was moved from September to June, it seems like a lot of local communities are recognizing that lawn signs will be out for a much longer period of time during the year, and they're grappling with that, so they have a lot of questions about that, which is basically a local zoning issue.
Constitutional.
We had some questions about the little-known Schedule O, which Brian and Kim alluded to, which is where the limited liability companies report their breakouts and the partnerships. Probably far and away still the number one topic that we're asked about is the time off to vote question and how that's to be interpreted. But probably within the last week or so coming up on the outside was questions about the new green light law and how that'll be administered. So in terms of the unit, we participated in the monthly ECA call back in June. We processed 77 foils for the month of June. We issued 2 press releases since the last board meeting, both with regard to the electronic poll book, the initial approval of the first 3 vendors, and then the additional vendor who has since withdrawn. We participated in a national tabletop to vote presentation. We did the agency did presentations on best practices around trainings and also incident response procedures. We're updating the voter registration form, the NVRA form, and the affidavit ballot forms that's in your packet today to accommodate the new 16-year-olds being pre-registered. That will be effective January 1st. We expect to have new forms for the county boards by December of this year, so when it takes effect in January, they'll be set. We participated in to discuss all the chapters that the agency has to deal with as a result of the recently closed legislative session. We're collecting ADA poll site surveys for the early voting locations. We're collecting early voting communication plans from the county boards. We had a meeting to discuss changes that have to be implemented in NYS Voter to accommodate early voting voter history. For the website, we posted the webcast for the June 6th meeting and the June 27th meeting. We did post the frequently asked questions advisory guidance document for the time off to vote issue. And we also posted a statement of identity form for LLCs and PLLCs. In terms of NVRA, Cheryl and I and Patrick and Michael went down to New York City We did a refresher training on NVRA tracking and transmittals. We met with the executive board. And we also had staff from each of the 5 boroughs from their registration units and their list maintenance units. That went very well, I believe, and was well received. In terms of the HAVA contracts, all the contracts are up to date and signed. Our unit will be administering the new early voting grant program and the e-poll book grant program, so we're working on contracts for that. We've set up an email box to receive contracts, to questions about the contracts, and we anticipate doing a training webinar in early August and again at the summer conference, so the counties understand how to administer the contracts. Lastly, the website accessibility coordinator.
That's John.
Yeah, that's me. We continue to have internal meetings
With
with
yourself?
IT. We've been working on a couple of the last remaining issues with regard to the website, the election night reporting site, the voter lookup site, and the MOVE Act application still are things that we have to resolve before the end of the year. So that's everything.
Any questions? Thank you, John.
Okay.
So we'll move on to William Cross, ITU.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'll start with projects. Capus Vitus, the development continues on the project. Recent activity continues to be focused on the EFS portion, but also now ballot access testing as we finalize development. We did encounter some difficulties this period with the authentication software, which is the login portion to access the system, which required us to postpone the soft launch with the beta group. However, these issues have just now been resolved actually earlier this week, and we're finalizing testing, and we'll be rescheduling the first session with that group on or about August 14th. We've also made significant progress with the data conversion efforts, which has been problematic up until now. That's bringing over the legacy data from the old system into the new and aligning it into the so they have a historical reference in the new system. We've made very good progress with that in the past couple weeks, and we hope to have this actually complete for the beta group in the same time frame as we for next month for them to use. For NYS Voter, as we mentioned last month, we were working with the voter registration vendors and the 3 custom counties to define system changes in theirs and our systems to accommodate early voting indicators. Those requirements have been finalized and shared with the vendors. All indicated that they should have no issues in implementing them in the time frame. We're also finalizing development of the in-house MOVE application or NICE ballot application to replace the currently outsourced one. We plan to begin county outreach and testing during the next 2 weeks for that. As Bob mentioned, we've been key participant in working with executive and other units on budgeting issues and impact of new legislation, particularly with respect to the IT requirements of many of them. E-poll books as well. IT's worked with ops and as well as executive and ODS on procurement and security issues around e-poll books. Accessibility, as John mentioned. We also continue to work with the PIO and the other units. We had the engaged vendor completed their initial audit of our website and identified any current existing accessibility issues. We now believe we have all those addressed, everything from their findings, and we'll be scheduling a follow-up scan, a confirmation scan with them to confirm that. And we've also begun the voter lookup election night reporting sites as well as scans for pre-production scans for Capus Vitus and the MOVE applications. On security, the cybersecurity board efforts, I think Bob gave a good rundown in terms of the county risk assessment. All site visits have been completed. We're now in the reporting phase. Received about 25 of those reports. We finalized one, provided comments on 12 others, and continue to review the others as received. And we were also currently reviewing the draft trend report. The intrusion detection systems have essentially been completed throughout the state with the exception of 2 counties, which we continue to work with to define either to get them to sign up for the program or define that they have this existing capability already somehow. And for managed security services, we completed the 5 pilot counties, and the next batch of 13 is currently underway. We've also begun discussions with OGS and the other partners, again, as Executive mentioned, about our next phase of mitigation and remediation with the counties and how best to address those issues and needs identified in the security risk assessments. We participated in the National Tabletop Exercise. Jeff Baez, our Chief Information Security Officer, presented. During that exercise, one of the states that presented was New York, and we were able to relate some of the efforts that we've done over the past year or so with regard to cybersecurity and our efforts with the counties. And we're also continuing to work with the SUNY Center for Technology and Government on the NICE voter data abnormality project, and to gain better understanding analytics from existing data and look for potential issues. And as always, we're working on multiple security improvements here internally for our own infrastructure, and we're currently working with DHS this week and next to perform, for them to perform an assessment of our infrastructure and applications, and we'll presumably have reports from that soon to follow. For the website, traffic of the website has been normal levels. There's a slight bump up around primary election. And that was it.
Any questions?
What is the current schedule for campus?
The soft launch for the beta group will be August. Based on feedback from that, we are still looking within this year.
Well, that's great. I mean, we're, well, no, I don't mean, I mean, this has been a long time coming.
I understand.
And, you know, it's been years and years and years, and to see it,
11 years.
okay, 11 years. And to see it potentially, you know,
This
light at
close.
the end of the tunnel is encouraging.
For me also.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is, because I know we raise it almost every meeting.
There
but-
could be a freight train headed.
Well, hopefully not. Hopefully it'll be great.
Please, Commissioner.
I think, you know, besides cybersecurity.
There's many freight trains
I
headed our way.
think this is our biggest priority. I mean, cybersecurity being, I think, number one with everybody, but this campus FITUS fix, I think, is right there, because I think it's gonna really enhance the
Long
public's
overdue.
ability. It's long overdue, and it's really gonna make the public's access to campaign finance information so much better.
Absolutely, and we've from all the demos we've provided so far, and of course they're not all full functionality. We've received very good feedback, and people seem generally pleased with what they're seeing so far. So it is very hopeful.
Good. Well, we're hopeful as well. So hopefully the testing will go well,
Thank you.
and, yeah,
Yes,
and
thanks.
everything will roll out. Okay. Thanks. Anything else for Bill? Okay, then we'll move on. We have on the agenda Risa Sugarman with enforcement. I see she again
She's
has
not here.
chosen not to attend the meeting.
So let's just go through the statistics again. How many subpoenas has she requested from us this year?
And zero. But I didn't bring the statistics, but some of these I know, so
And how many criminal proceedings has she proposed this year?
zero.
She hasn't been here in a year, has she?
And how many hearing officer proceedings?
I checked this one this morning because I myself actually asked Bob because I was incredulous that there hadn't been at least one. The number is zero.
0, 0, 0.
But she gets good press.
Unbelievable. Oh,
Don't let the facts get in the way.
me and the filter.
So
Okay.
this may be irrelevant.
Okay, well, I just
And-
wanted to check that I didn't miss anything in the last month.
And my understanding is that her refusal to come to the board meeting, you've asked.
We have
is
asked
that
her.
correct?
That's correct.
You've asked.
I'd
And her
ask
refusal to
every 2
come is
weeks.
based on the pending litigation?
That's true.
That she started.
That's
Yes.
also accurate.
And interestingly enough, it's been several months now, and we called the court for a status update, and they assured us they would call us back, and never did.
That was my next question. Do we have any updates on the status of the court suit? Apparently not. And that was all filed when? Do you know? Do you remember the dates?
I don't remember the sort of date, early in the year.
Early in the year.
So it's been pending for quite some time. Well, hopefully that'll get resolved soon, and we can get back.
It was interesting they wouldn't
And-
even call
and Brian,
back.
what is the number of open referrals? Do you have that?
In terms of deficiencies,
Right.
around over 1,200 and less than 1,300 of those are open. The number of
All of them.
for failures to file for the January periodic, 2,289. We just we haven't sent over it yet, but the number of failures to file for the July 2019 is 3,181, which may be a record.
But I think it's virtually all of them, minus a handful, are still open.
Okay. You just wanted to confirm that
Well, interestingly enough, in the
if
enacting
you were an
legislation.
election lawyer
Uh-oh.
and you had a client and your client came to you and said, "What are the consequences if I don't file?" I guess you would ethically tell them, "Well, yes, you should file."
And then I would wink
And the
hard.
law makes this penalty and that penalty, and then they ask you, well, if I don't file, what are the chances of those penalties being imposed on me? And I guess you'd have to say they're virtually zero.
Well, first I would
Imposed on
assess
you?
who, first I
Yes.
would assess who my client is. Because it increases
Oh, that's
significantly.
right.
That's right.
If your client was somebody who got press attention, then that might be something that.
Or had no
enforcement
money
would-
to
Well,
buy it.
interestingly enough, the Public Financing Commission, when it's enacted, they're gonna need an enforcement council, so,
Well, I think my understanding from, I haven't talked to you about it, but I've talked to other members of the commission, is that they all understand that even if the Board of Elections were going to get assigned the task, that there's no way that you could implement a public financing system with the existing enforcement structure. So I hope the commission will keep that in mind as well.
I'm with you.
All right, well, sorry for the
It's
day.
okay, that's okay. Is there anything else? This is the end of the unit reports. Anything else for any of the staff?
She's not doing that work. We suggest that some of that money be moved over.
That would be nice.
Since the
Well,
work's
she
not
gives
being
back
done.
money every year.
Excuse me?
Her unit gives back money every year to the tune of hundreds of
And then doesn't do
thousands of
what she's
dollars.
supposed to do. Right?
Well, her staff has decreased now, another person left, so she's down to 5, which was our original enforcement staff for all those years.
Except we were doing enforcement in those years. Okay.
How about now? Do you think we're done? I mean, if there's something else, I'm happy with. If not, we're gonna move on to old business.
These little asides don't count?
Absolutely, they count. All right, so we'll move on to old business, which I have none listed. Does anybody have any old business they want to bring up? Okay, then we'll move on to new business. And we have a number of items under new business, which let's go through these. So the first one is, this was referred to earlier, I believe Tommy referred to this. This is the change in the no ink software, some change or addition, I think they're making to the way
Additional
their
book.
system works.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So the software is unchanged, so there's no difference in the way that the system works. Somewhat similar in fashion to voting system software or hardware. Is there are times when a hardware like a screen or another hardware component needs to be swapped out, and they want to add that to the approved certification. For ePoll books, the no ink platform uses iPads. And one of the things that they had wanted to add to the approved list of configurations for use in New York State was the use of an iPad that had a built-in cellular connection. So whereas the other iPads that were included in the configurations we had already tested and approved relied on an external network connection, in the case of a Wi-Fi router or a MiFi. This directly communicates with the cloud through the built-in cellular connection. So
Okay.
this is just the addition of that hardware, but everything else is unchanged.
Okay. Are there any questions about this? They're looking for approval. You've
No, I move the resolution.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, okay, so that's approved, and then we have another NTS, which we just approved at our last meeting, special meeting, I might add, has apparently chosen not to be active in New York State and want to actually have their system taken off the market. Is that
Correct.
my way I understand it? So we would be
Removing them from the list of
just
approved
removing them
systems.
from the list of eligible vendors.
Correct.
I move the resolution.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So that's approved as well. All right, then we'll move on to some emergency, well, these are not, these are adoptions, I believe. Oh, these are emergency. Are all of these emergency adoptions?
They are.
Yes.
All four? Okay, so we'll take them one by, let's take them one by one so we understand what we're doing.
Well, okay.
Do you disagree with that? Is there-
Well, two of them are just simply a readoption, 62-10-10 and 62-10-18. The emergency, the time period hasn't passed for final adoption as of today, so we're
Okay.
readopting
Okay.
them
Okay.
for
This is sort of a
60 days.
placeholder
It's a placeholder till our next meeting
until
when
it's
everything
ready
is
for
right.
final. So
Right.
there's nothing changed here. This is sort of a.
The language is the
This is
same.
sort of a
There's-
housekeeping.
Correct.
Okay,
So
so
moved.
we could, let's do those two then, they're housekeeping events. This is 62-10-10, 62-10-18. Motion to approve.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
So we'll see those again at the next meeting? Is that correct?
For
They
permanent-
have
For
to.
permanent adoption or?
60 days.
Six,
so
oh, it won't
whenever-
be next
Well,
week.
Nick's our calendar person.
Okay, so it
He
might be
tells
a
us
couple
they're
days.
properly
Okay.
aged.
But we will see these again for final
Yes.
adoption.
Yes.
And then the next one is the 62-10-19. This is the minimum machines for early voting. This, I believe, relates to the,
This also is an
Large.
emergency adoption, but it will be for 90 days.
okay.
And there was one change that I'll highlight, and that's section 3. We attempted to address the vote center issue
Right.
that people were concerned about.
Right. This will
Correct?
really allow vote centers to occur, which our previous regulations, I understand, have demanded so many voting
Well,
machines.
there was a
it wasn't
one
really
line in
practical.
there that would have allowed them to do it anyway if they sought permission,
Okay.
like Nassau County. But this makes it clearer and sets a standard.
It's a standard.
A
but
more
there's also some
reasonable
discretion.
standard.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, the counties can still make the application to us for fewer machines if they can show us that they're gonna be.
Well, we're only requiring 2, so
Yeah, yeah.
they
Well,
could.
they have to follow the formula and allocate them among all of the vote center sites that people can go to. So their
Right.
total allocation has to meet the formula, but they have to allocate at least to any given poll sites.
But they
that's
could
submitted.
request a downward modification from the
That's
totality of
what I
that.
wanna
Right.
emphasize,
Yes.
is
Right.
that they can still request a downward modification, but then they have the burden of showing us that the modification is not going to.
Right, and there is the provision that if, at any time they see that the number of machines is not sufficient, they have to, within a day or that day, send out more machines. But
30-minute wait time is
Highlighted.
cross-referenced multiple times to ensure that that's complied with.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I understand this, we're in a sort of testing period. It's our first time out with these early voting sites, so hopefully things go well and everybody service, we'll see how it goes. Is there a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That's adopted. Then the last one is the procedures for early voting. And again, you want to just give us a quick
Yes, this
rundown of
is.
what
This is a readoption of the emergency regulation. It would otherwise time out on August 6th, like 2 of the others, and it is not ripe for final adoption until July 28th.
Oh, okay.
So in order to push us over to keep them in effect, it's readopting the emergency for an additional 60 days.
So this again is kind of a housekeeping.
And just to be
Yes, sir.
clear for those that may be listening, obviously, we would still be accepting any comments that people would like to make on all of these.
Okay. Have we gotten any comments on any of these?
There are some comments, I think, that we have received.
On this particular one?
Well, we've got a lot of
6-11,
phone
yes.
calls on the vote center issue too, maybe not
Yeah.
official comments as much as yelling, but we've gotten them.
From the counties or from
Yeah, yeah,
voters?
Yeah. The county.
no, not the voters.
The counties are not
Yeah,
happy,
yeah,
I
but they
agree.
should be happier today.
All right, so is there a motion on the early voting regulations?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So those are all adopted, and we'll be seeing all of those again.
Yes, you will.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Nothing was finally
For
adopted.
finalizing, okay.
Yes.
Next one is a resolution for the use of force by our peace officers. This relates, I believe, to the Enforcement Council's office only. My understanding is the only 2 peace officers in the agency are in her office.
That's correct.
So this relates specifically to that. This is something that was adopted pursuant to state law.
It's correct, part of the budget. Act, Part ZZ of Chapter 55 required that any agency which employs peace officers to adopt a model use of force policy, which that budget provision also required that the state police with the Municipal Police Training Council adopt a model policy, which they did, and they've sent to us, and the draft that we came up with is based upon that. We did share the draft with Ms. Sugarman at the end of last week, and she provided comments to you, or to us, and we've in turn sent it to you yesterday, as well as what claims to be her model policy. I'm not sure what authority she adopted that under or when it was adopted. There's no indication of a date, a time, or an authority, but so the question, and looking at her comments, I don't know that we've completed our review of those. So, this-
Well, I think we should note that we asked her to come to the meeting
We
to
did.
talk with the commissioners about this issue, and she ignored that request, which is contumacious and really in violation of her obligations as an employee, a state employee, subject to regulations of the commissioners. But I think that given the lack of urgency over doing this, there's no time limit for us to adopt a
No, there is not.
policy.
No.
So I think it makes sense to put it over for another month, and that'll give us a chance to actually review and
Well, that's fair.
I have a policy for this kind of thing, I think only does 2 things. It sets up training criteria, because once you have the policy, you can then look at it and say, you know, what kind of training do I have to have these people in? And the other thing is, and when someone gets shot or someone uses their weapon, it sets up the criteria or the standard for whatever you do in the trial. It doesn't stop anything.
Right.
So I would like to see if we could do it, some sort of training situation put in here.
Okay.
That looks at how they're trained, because that's very significant in use of force. It's the most significant thing in use of force. I don't know, I understand they do go for some training.
They do. The Municipal Police Training Council does require a certain level of training for anybody who's designated as a peace officer. I don't know if that's been
What kind
upgraded.
of level is that?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. I know it has to deal with firearms handling, and obviously safe storage and use. But I don't know if this law will indicate what their minimum training standards will be changed to. That's a good question.
I mean, my feeling about this is that
It does review.
this is a situation where we have peace officers that they're going through a situation. They're not policemen. They're not law enforcement, that kind of thing. Probably what they would run into is not so much significantly hostile, but run into someone who has some sort of deficiency, mental deficiency or someone. And that's really the concern I have. And them recognizing that and being able at least have some skills in monitoring it and handling it, before they use other force.
I agree.
And I don't know whether they have that kind of training or not, but I think that would be significant.
Well, her own policy references the use of deadly physical force, so I think we're the Board of Elections, for
Yeah,
God's sake.
I'm not so much concerned with the wording in here, because I don't think that changes anything.
Well, and I think you're right. I mean,
Yeah.
there is a section, part 11 has deal with training, but I understand your comments.
I mean, if the difference is in the activity that we perform, we should look at the kind of incident that would probably occur, and they should have some training in it.
I think in a historical perspective, when we looked at procedures, when we made the regulation, when the peace officers were, before the enforcement situation we have now, there was a requirement that they be certified of having met that training, a training regimen at the time. And since you've deferred the authority now, you've granted the authority to enforcement, all we requested in the regulation was a confirmation that that training has been completed and satisfactorily in order to maintain the authority that you've granted under that program.
Completed satisfactorily?
Well, that's part of the lawsuit, and that.
She doesn't report that.
That doesn't get,
Correct, or what?
well, nothing gets reported.
No,
There's
she's
no, there's,
objected to our
entirely-
limitations on
entirety.
carrying a handgun in the board proper. That makes a lot of the staff nervous.
I think this is important, because
well, I think it's
when you
also,
have an incident, okay?
I agree.
Immediately after the incident, you reevaluate your whole program, and usually there's an uptick in the program.
I
You know what I
agree.
mean? So
But-
you should start off
but
with
it does speak to agencies, but the general concept of the law is the state police, local police, county sheriff, correctional facilities, and then it gets around to agencies like us, we're not doing a lot of those things, we're
Maybe
investigating.
that's how we could get
We're-
the non-filers going in
Well,
with guns out.
But that's why from
That's the
a,
raid, you
But-
haven't filed.
from a
But
point
the
of view of
likelihood
the
is
kind
if
of
it goes
work
down-
that, yes, peace officers
token for that.
may, but in their normal day of work, it's,
It's on their login.
in the history of the subpoenas that have come before you for consideration, was to go get a record somewhere in a bank or a treasurer. It wasn't to break down the door, certainly not to arrest anybody, or granted, things could happen. So that's why we tried to look at it, since we're not the state police, we're not a local police agency. The types of interactions that we have are related to the type of work we do. And that's why we tried to look at it from that perspective, and also, and
The
also.
bottom line is there's really no reason for our agency personnel to be using force for anything.
Yeah, I'm telling you, you can be threatened. I mean, in
Threatened
situations.
and defending is different.
No, but
but
there are
police
situations where people just react and you look at them and you feel your life is threatened. The most dangerous person with the weapon is the least trained.
Yes.
Agreed.
Agreed.
So you either
Fair
take away the weapons or you train them better.
Well, I guess I'm in favor of taking away the weapons,
No.
that there's no reason for any state board of elections personnel to have a weapon.
I don't even think our people serve the subpoenas.
No, that's
No,
put
she
up.
contracts out for service.
Right.
So, but the board, of the number of individuals, the board has issued peace officer status, there's still two working with the agency. So they have to be trained, they have to be covered by the policy.
Or it has to be taken away.
Or I guess failure to meet the requirement would be something you'd have to consider.
Or
In the
thou
future.
giveth and thou shalt taketh away.
Correct,
Could rescind
correct.
the except for officer status.
You also want trained investigators. You want personnel who will take that job.
Take away the peace
Who
officer
Well,
designation.
well,
There's no reason for it.
It's up to you.
All right, well, let's think about that, maybe.
We can entertain that as well, but I do think, I agree with Commissioner Kellner, I think we should delay this
Yeah,
till we
I
get a
agree
better
with that.
handle on it, but I do think there are a number of considerations. I mean, for example, one of the things I don't know is what situations actually present themselves where peace officer status is necessary. What are we talking about where you're in a situation where you need to invoke firearms in some way? I don't know what that is. I'm curious when that might occur in this agency, but I
We
don't
can
know.
ask.
Well, I would like to, if Risa was here, I would
Historically, I'm
ask.
not aware of any incident since the agency was formed in 1974.
I'm not either.
But
so.
you've had peace officers before.
Yes, we have.
Yeah, so it
That's
hasn't,
true.
so it's
But-
not
but the
unusual
why?
And it was always an issue.
circumstance.
I will say this, it was always an issue here as to whether or not that status should be conferred upon any of our staff.
And when they were here, they kept their weapons in a locked box, not
They-
on their hip.
So,
Well, they were also under the board's direct control.
That's right.
so there is an issue there, but.
I know.
God bless you.
Okay, well, we'll consider all of this, and
So we'll add that to
Table.
take it up.
old
That'll be
business
old
at the next
business at the
meeting.
next meeting. And I haven't had a chance to read Reese's
That's fine.
comments either, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have the right to call the state police or call
Yes, that's still in
for
there.
assistance?
Yes.
Still,
Okay.
Okay, let's move on then to the next item, which is the updated voter reg form. I believe this is to reflect the new law that allows 16-year-olds to pre-register. Is
I
that the
don't
right
know.
term, pre-register? So we had to change our forms to accommodate that, and this is intended to do that. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So I have in front of me 3 forms. There's the agency-based voter reg form, there's the just regular voter reg form, and then there's the affidavit oath, which goes with affidavit voting. Those are the 3 forms before us.
So moved.
I have a question. I want to raise something about one of these forms, just so I understand. So, this is the affidavit ballot envelope form that we're talking about, which now incorporates the 16, because in that transaction, people can register. Those who vote affidavit but aren't registered can register, so they'll be at least eligible for the next election. So on this form, it's now being changed with what I think is kind of awkward language, but I guess it
That's
complies
in
with the
statute.
statute, so that's just the way it is. My question really relates down to the affidavit that the person then swears to down below when they sign this document. Because up top, you're saying you're gonna have to check a box that says you're at least 16, understand that you must be 18 before election day to vote, and you'll be 18 at the time of the election, and it goes through the statute. But at the bottom, when I'm swearing, one of the elements I'm swearing to is that I meet the requirements to register to vote in New York State, which it seems to me these people do not. So I'm a 16-year-old person who comes to the poll site to try to vote. I guess that's our situation. I'm not sure why they're there, but they're there. And the person, the poll worker says you can't vote, you're not in the book. Duh. So they take the form and they go, I'm 16, I guess I can do this, and they check the box, I'm 16, but I'll be 18.
But the statute says that you can register to vote, but you won't be eligible to vote
So are
until
you
you turn 18.
Are you a registered voter at 16? Is
You're a
that how-
pre-registered voter.
I would, if I could address this issue,
Yeah,
because
go ahead.
there's a couple little snags. There is a little bit of a disconnect between the registration and pre-registration language, and we noted different states have sort of dealt with this the same way in terms of how it then translates into the affidavit at the bottom. And several states are doing what we're doing, which is not placing additional language in the affidavit. In our case, we have an excellent reason for not changing that language, which is rather uncharacteristically in 5.2.10, I think it's in sub 11, but I have to chase it back to figure out which subdivision it's in. It actually says a place for the applicant to execute the form on a line which is clearly labeled signature of applicant preceded by the following specific form of affirmation. So in considering whether or not we could change the affidavit, we had this still in the statute very specific requirement that this be the exact language. So we did not change it. We were somewhat comforted by the fact that we found that several other states that have pre-registrations also had left their affidavit in the same condition. But I acknowledge there is a little bit of a disconnect between the register language and the concept of pre-register and register.
Frankly, Brian, I'm not questioning why you didn't change it. I understand
Right.
there's a statutory requirement. I just feel that, you know, you're now placing this person, this 16-year-old or 17-year-old for that matter, in a position where they're saying, you know, I want to register, I'm not old enough to vote, but then I'm saying I meet all the requirements to register. I'm not, you know, my view of the statute. My view of the statute is though these are not, but these are not registered unless I'm right.
Well, I think there'd be a poll
voters?
worker disconnect in some instances. I mean,
They're not.
if you go in and you say hi and they say you're not in the poll book, but I'm 16 and I can do this. I can imagine poll workers that aren't well versed in this would say, you're 16.
Well, that may happen, but if the person wants to, they can fill this out.
We
I
should
don't-
at least tell
I
them.
don't dispute that. I'm just feeling
think
we're
so.
putting them in a spot where they're affirming, swearing to something that, at least in my view, isn't really true. You're not really registered to vote yet.
No, but you are.
Are you?
The statute explicitly says you can register to vote at age 16. That doesn't give you the right to vote, it gives you the right to
So are you
register.
considered a registered voter when you do this? Is that how we read it?
Our reg, we have a category of pre-registered, and they show up in the list as pre-registered. In order to end up in the poll book, they, depending on the system, but it's usually they review the number of persons who are in this pre-registered category, who will be 18 by the whatever election we're printing the poll book for, and they manually move them from the pre-reg category to the reg category just to appear in the poll book, because that's the workaround that they have now. So it's mostly done in a manual because there aren't a ton of people in this category anyway.
And
But
it
they,
would not appear in the poll books.
Right.
they pre-registered normally
they're-
don't,
they're-
that's why they manually go through and look
Yeah.
The
whenever there's an
registration is
election.
considered pending.
Is that how
Whether you
it-
say pre-registered or pending, it's the same operative.
But they are registered.
I think for purposes of the affidavit,
They-
they
they
fall
don't
under
vote.
the definition of registered because the legislature gave us
They let 'em
that
register.
And
form of
thankfully not
affidavit,
involved in
knowing
this.
that it would be used for this category. So in order to harmonize what the legislature did in making the change to the law in the context of the way it currently exists, I think that at least for purposes of the affidavit, the word pre-register and register are synonymous.
It would have been easier to have a different form.
Okay.
There are a lot of things that
I'm not
under
gonna hold
different
this up.
circumstances.
I'm just raising it as a.
Yeah, would have been
Mark,
easier.
Legal
We have
issue.
what
You
we
know,
have.
like a driver's permit versus a license that says shall take effect in 2028.
Okay. Is there a motion then to adopt these?
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? It is also adopted. Then we'll move on to the contract for alternative dispute resolution. I believe that relates to HAVA complaints.
Yes.
Yes.
Is that correct? That's something we have to have under HAVA
Yes.
to give people a place to go to resolve the complaints.
Correct.
Correct,
And this is something that we contract out for,
yes.
and we only pay for whatever we use.
That
Correct.
under this, we would only pay for what we use at an hourly rate, so there's no expense unless the service is used.
And how often is the service used?
In the history of the agency, it has not been
It's
used.
never been used.
And these
so-
were the only ones that were applied to the,
That's true.
All right, is there any more
So
questions?
just so you understand, the appropriation of money isn't, it's an
It's not-
authority to use money, it's not an appropriation of money.
Correct.
We will tie some money to the contract, just to sign the contract, but,
Okay.
but it's
I move that
available.
we adopt the resolution.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That is also adopted. And we'll move on to our next item, which is the cybersecurity spending, and I believe this is refers back to what we discussed at the beginning of the meeting. Is there any more discussion on this? This is, again, reminding everybody, it's moved 1.2 million out of the cybersecurity account into the regular Board of Elections account.
Which we're all doing reluctantly.
Reluctantly,
But
right.
we feel we have no choice.
Right, so is there a motion to do that?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, opposed.
There also is
We're all
a,
opposed, but we're all voting in favor. I think that's our situation.
there is a July 2019 Secure Election Center report that's attached to that,
Okay.
that resolution, just to give you an update on the work that we've been doing.
Well, I'm gonna read that actually, now that you mentioned that. Was that in my packet?
Yes.
Should have been part of the
What's that?
resolution,
Okay,
yes.
yeah, I'm gonna take that. Okay, then the last one is a fair campaign code matter. This is something else we don't see a lot of at this agency.
No, that's true.
There was a fair campaign code complaint made here, and under the law, we then have to decide whether to refer it to a hearing officer for resolution. I guess this is, I don't know if anybody wants to get into what this is, but,
Well, I've read it.
I mean, I looked at it too, and I don't,
The report is good. The question is it ripe for hearing now?
I guess they want a hearing, and it
Well-
can't be resolved any other way.
Looking at this late last night, they do, both sides do want it.
Okay,
There was also a criminal component of it that went to enforcement.
okay.
And there is also a civil litigation currently ongoing that when I looked up the docket number, there are several documents and it's active. They seem to be litigating this very completely in Nassau County Supreme Court. So I don't know if us holding a hearing would interfere with that or interfere with the ongoing investigation of the Enforcement Division, or, so
What do you recommend? in
I would
terms of
recommend
the
a delay.
report?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I would recommend a delay, a tabling.
You wanna
I would
table?
concur in that recommendation, that we not dismiss it, but that we hold it in abeyance pending the fact-finding and the determinations in the civil litigation being conducted on Long
Yeah.
Island.
How does
Well
everybody
put.
feel about that? Everybody okay with that? All right, so we will just put that off. That'll again be under old business, maybe at the next meeting. Well, keep it on old business. We'll have to dispose of it at some point, one way or the other. So at this point, we will defer until that next meeting.
Thank you.
Okay? I would like, that's the end of the session. Is there anything else to come before the board? I'd like a quick executive session, if we could, just to speak about pending litigation.
I also am here, have requested in writing permission to speak today. I'm Lulu Freistad, and I'm the co-founder of Smart Elections.
Well, can you speak about,
I have no objection.
I mean,
Super. I wanted to follow up, a number of us were here at the June 6th meeting, and I wanted to follow up with some of the issues that we brought up there. We had assurances from the board at that point that the security issues with the Dominion ICE would be further investigated, and you would at least take under consideration the decertification of the machine, which is what many people have written and requested. We had over 130 letters at that time, and I know that more voters have continued to write to you because we're getting copies of those letters. So I know that there is a pretty strong outpouring from the public requesting the decertification of that hybrid machine. So we wanted an update on that.
well, I think the update is you can see what happened at today's meeting. There was no action regarding that particular machine. I think at this point, it remains a certified machine based upon our requirements as a state to certify voting system, and there's been no change in the state.
So I don't really feel that the assurance we made, that the assurances that we were given that there would be consideration for the new information that we brought last month, I don't have the feeling that that's been taken into consideration. I have the sense that you're just saying, well, it's just the status quo. But I remember Commissioner Spano saying, you know, you have these PhDs, you have these experts here, and we have other experts advising us, you know, also, but we will take this under consideration. So we had a feeling that there would be at least a new evaluation, and I'm not having a sense that that took place.
Yeah, and we did take it under consideration. We thought about it, and we didn't vote at this meeting to do anything else but keep the machines as they were approved. We listened very carefully. I thought about it, everyone thought about it. No one brought it up and said, well, let's do this or let's do that. That was it. Didn't change my mind. I don't know about the rest of them. I didn't talk to them.
So was there actually a meeting where this was discussed, or emails that went back and forth that we could get copies of?
No, there was not.
So there was actually no discussion after that meeting, the June 6th meeting?
Not to my knowledge.
I see, so there hasn't actually been a reconsideration of the new issues that we brought up at that meeting, including.
No, there was a reconsideration of it, we just didn't have a meeting. The meeting was in my head.
Well,
In his head, if we were gonna reconsider it, we would've brought it up.
All right, that doesn't
These were
actually
forwarded.
seem like a reconsideration. We
These-
had
these
Professor Appel
considerations
come
were
from Princeton
forwarded
and bring,
to
you know, his testimony to
The
you
operation,
and
yes.
just
Oh, yes.
a
Oh,
strong
yes.
concern.
We had a lot of that information before. That's why I brought it up again, and that's why Appel was here and you all were here. That was a big consideration. I listened very carefully for that because I was very concerned about it. And I'm sure everyone else on the board did. And the way we would operate then is to say to each other, hey, we think this is very serious, let's call a meeting. We didn't think that.
So then my next follow-up question would be, there are specific mitigations that are listed in the report that came from New York's own security lab, including putting a foam block in the machine, taking the print cartridge out of the machine, opening the machine so that poll workers can see if the print cartridge is running. Have the 4 counties that are using the Dominion Ice now been appraised of those mitigation, those mitigation steps, and are they getting any sort of training in conducting those?
If you want, I can certainly address that.
Yeah, Tom, why don't you speak to that?
So there were a number of counties that had a primary election last month that were using some or all of the election was conducted using the ice machines. The election operations unit did provide them, well, we called each and every one of them, had a discussion with them about some of the concerns. We told them what the recommendations were, and based on what was able to be done at the time, we provide them with procedures that they should follow to ensure that there was no issue with the machines. We can, as I mentioned in my unit report earlier, we continue to work with Dominion on trying to figure out if there's an easier way to implement certain protections that were discussed in the report that you referenced, because some of the things that we mentioned, we also mentioned in that report why they may not be a great idea. As far as like a foam block, then you can cause wear and tear on the machine. As far as leaving the back door open, you now have a physically open machine, which is not very good from a perception standpoint. So we were trying to figure out, and we continue to do so, how do we implement those protections in a way that makes the process, that doesn't really interrupt the normal process, to make it easier for the county boards to implement and for the poll workers as well.
So all 4 counties you met with all 4 counties that are using the machines now?
All 4, I think only 3 of them had elections. I'd have to go back and look, but yes, everyone that was using the machines in the June primary were contacted by Brendan and myself.
Okay, because I think there's a new county that just purchased them. I can send it to you. But can we get a list of the documents that were provided to those counties and the suggestions that are being made?
Yeah, I mean, we could look at them and make sure that there's no security issues, but for the most part, I think it would be redacted, if at all.
It
So
would be redacted?
Well, I'd have to go back through the things that we said. For the most part, it would be a public document. I don't think there's anything in there as far as the documentation that we provide to the counties that we wouldn't want released. So a lot of it was how to operate the machine or to set up the machines in a way that will allow them to be used safely. So I think that we'd probably be able to provide you the entire document. I would just have to go back through to make sure nothing from a security standpoint
More
should be
safely.
protected. I'm sorry?
More safely, how they would be used.
Yes.
They are being used safely, but more safely to address some of the concerns. I think Dominion itself is also considering another change to disallow the AutoCast even on the BMD functionality, so that it would have to be returned to the voter, so there would be no process for it to double vote.
That was one of the options that we had provided to the county,
Yeah.
was turning one of the machines into what's called provisional mode that would not allow it to function as a scanner, but only as a ballot marking device.
Right. Oh, so they're actually considering that as a standard modification for the machine?
That was one of the, well, that's something that can be done now. But obviously, if you're, as opposed to buying one machine for ballot marking and one machine for scanning, you'd have to buy 2 full service machines to cover those 2 separate processes, which would be double as expensive for a county.
Yeah, it's a very expensive ballot marking device. It's $14,000 for just a BMD.
We provide the ability of a county to turn one of the machines if they had spares, because some of these counties with their primary elections didn't necessarily have a county-wide primary, so they may have had some spare machines to use. And we told them if they wanted to, they had the option of using one of these spare machines and putting it into a provisional mode, which would force it to function only as a ballot marking device. And then that would have to be, the ballot would then have to be, brought over physically by the voter and scanned into a scanner.
I see, and is that now a standard recommendation that Dominion is making on that machine?
You're still working through.
Dominion
all the
is
edges.
looking to submit a software change that would address some of these issues. I don't think that's something that they would have to submit because it's already possible. So that was one of the options that we provided to the counties that were using the machines at the time.
Thank you for clarifying that for me. And then we were interested also in where you're at with the certification process for the Express Vote Excel. I heard you say that they're doing the secondary source code review, is that correct?
Correct.
So that's with NYS now?
Correct.
And what is the timeline that you're expecting for that Express Vote Excel to come before the board for certification?
I have no expectation of a time frame right now at this point because right now NYS is doing their secondary source code review. They had some questions that arose out of that we're trying to get information from the testing lab that did the initial source code review and documentation. So until such time that everything is satisfied to Brennan and my satisfaction, it will not be presented to the commissioners for approval.
3 months, 6 months, 1 month, 9 months, approximately 8?
Again, this is dependent on outside organizations to provide us with the documentation, and then for our own independent security consultants to feel comfortable and satisfied with that documentation. So I can't give you any sort of a time frame.
Probably not next month.
No, I don't foresee it happening anytime in the next few months.
Is there going to be more advanced notification that will be on the agenda? One of the things I think that is frustrating for people is, for example, with the June 27th meeting, where the NTS system got certified, it was literally 24 hours notice, and a lot of people in various election groups around the state are centered in New York City, and that's very short notice to make a trip to come up here and be at that meeting. So when the certification comes up for the Express Vote Excel, will there be a reasonable, say, 2 to 3 week advance notice to the public? This is going to be on our meeting, this will be posted on your website, with advance notice?
So
Let me answer that.
Okay.
That if you have comments about the express vote, those comments should be forthcoming now and not 24 hours before our meeting. And there are certain public aspects of the testing process that go on. So it is, from my point of view, it is not productive to get a 3-sentence email that is not substantive, telling me don't certify something. Because that's not how I make decisions, and I suggest my colleagues don't work that way either. That we work off very substantive testing and review process that goes through our regulations. So right now is the time for you to ask for the technical data package that has been submitted for certification. Now is the time for you to ask for the test reports that have been available and to get put on a list for additional test reports as they come in. Now is the time to ask for notification of the public usability testing. And what other public tests are there? I know there's a public usability test. Is there any other public testing?
I don't believe in, no. I mean, when we were looking to do, whereas in the past, I know many of the systems were put up for public testing towards the end of the process. Brennan and I had wanted to put this one out sooner since it is a new system. And I would only add that with regard to the time frame, as I try to do every meeting, give some sort of expectation. I'm never going to just bring up a machine for certification at a meeting without saying that the meeting before that I expect to do so.
That's great. I took notes of that, and I really appreciate you providing me with that information. I do think that I have previously requested to be put on the list for additional reports. I know that I've asked you for those, so I can put that in writing again. I would like to be on the list of.
Well,
all-
and I just want to make it clear that I've given you that outline of what documents are produced in the certification process months ago. That this isn't the first time you've heard from me that this is what you need to do if you want to be involved in the certification review process.
So I thought that I had requested that, so who needs to receive that request?
Okay, it goes to John
Sure,
Connor.
public information
These are
office.
Public
So
information.
info@elections.ny.gov.
And
Okay, so I'll make that request formally. And then we were concerned about the Robus poll books. They're running on the ASUS laptops. There was a report that came out in 2018 that about 500,000 ASUS laptops were compromised with malware, and it was definitely something that we were concerned about. Was there any investigation done of the Robus e-poll books and whether or not they're running on those ASUS laptops?
Yes, and the answer is no, they're not.
They're not running on ASUS laptops?
Correct.
Perfect, thank you so much, I appreciate knowing about that. The two other issues that I wanted to bring up, some of the people from disability communities that we're in touch with have been asking for years for the full face ballot provision to be eliminated, and I went back and did research, and there was actually a report from the Brennan Center in 2005, which was submitted to the State Board of Elections, that the full face ballot provision actually is not written into the statute. The Brennan Center did a report saying this was actually a misinterpretation.
I'm very familiar with the report.
And so am
Okay.
I.
Can we, yeah, so please.
And we don't agree
We don't
with
agree with
your
the Brennan Center.
characterization. It's
Okay.
in the statute.
That's a misstatement by the Brennan Center, in our opinion. That's they have misinterpreted the law.
Wow, okay.
Well, Actually.
So we did go through that.
Actually, I think she's also mischaracterizing the Brennan
Well,
Center.
we've had this
But
discussion.
you and I have had this discussion.
Many years
We're
ago.
very familiar
Very familiar
with
with it.
what's in the report. I have made public recommendations to the legislature
Get that.
on amending the law. And of course, this year, finally, there was a passage of the ballot.
Friendly.
Voter-friendly
Voter
ballot.
Right.
Act, which is the legislature's last word on the subject. But you know, now is
And they
not
left
an
it in there.
appropriate time to be raising all these issues.
I'm not clear when is an appropriate time. This is the public meeting of the Board of Elections, so I've sent much of this information through letters. When you say people.
Not about the full face ballot, that's the first time I've heard that from you. Okay.
Go ahead, you had one more point.
Yeah, so I think that it's great to hear that you had presented information to the legislature about the full face ballot, and we'll be interested to hear, what your input is, because the representatives that I've spoken to from the disability community is one of their top concerns. They're very, very frustrated about it, and it affects everybody because there's a lot of voting machines that we're not allowed to use in New York State because of that provision. So I think it's something that is really important to take a look at, especially with respect to that community's needs being met. So I look forward to finding out what your thoughts are on that, Douglas. And then the other issue that I'm concerned about is the lack of transparency with the audits and the recounts. So for example, I requested from the New York State Board of Election to videotape the audit of the 45th City Council District race. I had credentials from a candidate to allow me to be there, but the legal counsel for the New York City Board of Elections is not allowing anyone to videotape any of the audits. They're not allowing a videotape of the recount in Queens. That's a historic recount. If we want to look at other recount legislation for the state, which is going to be put forward in next legislative session, it would be so helpful for us to have had videotape of that recount, so people could look at it and go, what is it like? But because the legal counsel for the New York City Board of Elections is being so, what feels obstructionist in that regard, not to allow, just journalists, people who are trained to go in there and respectfully videotape, to do that, then we've lost that opportunity. So I wanted to know if you could help facilitate a more transparent relationship, in those sort of situations.
Have you raised this at the City Board of Elections?
I have repeatedly, yeah.
At a board meeting?
I've been back and forth with Valerie Vasquez and with the New York City Council, Richmond, who's voting, Those are the people that I've been in contact with.
But you haven't gone to a board meeting to articulate this?
Actually haven't had time to go to the board meeting since the issue came up. I was testifying in Florida at the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights and had some various other
Fair enough, I just think it'd be more
obligations.
appropriate to raise that with their board than this board, frankly. I think if the issue is a city issue, which apparently it is, I think it'd be appropriate to raise it with their commissioners, maybe at a board meeting, and see what their reaction is. I don't know what their policy is, frankly. I don't know how they, handle situations like this, but it seems like it is something I would raise with their board.
I will do that.
Rather than this board.
I think it would be great if the New York State Board would put in a, just,
I think what would be helpful to us is if you raised it at a city board meeting and they gave you an answer, we could then maybe look at that. But I think in this context, for us to just weigh in on something that you haven't even raised with them yet, probably isn't even appropriate. I think it's better if you raise it with them first, see what their reaction is, and then if you're still dissatisfied, maybe we can talk about it. But to raise it here first just doesn't seem appropriate to me. I think you should raise it with them first, to be fair to them, so they have a chance to react to yours.
well, I will raise it. I have raised it repeatedly, as I said, with.
No, I understand, but you didn't raise it with the commissioners, so I think that would be appropriate.
It was a very time-sensitive issue
Fair enough.
because of the recount
Fair enough.
happening, and then the
Fair
recount
enough.
just ended this morning.
Fair
So
enough.
we've lost that opportunity, but
I understand.
it was time-sensitive.
I got you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming. Okay, I don't think we have anything else unless we can set a next board, but I do want that quick executive session if we could afterwards, just to speak
Yes.
about the litigation.
Well,
And other than that, we just have to set a board meeting.
so it would be,
September?
it would be helpful, based on the anticipated calendar, if we could pencil in a scheduled WebEx meeting or in-person meeting just to deal with any prima facie issues come from the certificates of nomination the last week of August.
Okay.
Related, that's only a WebEx meeting if we need to have one, if
Okay.
there's a prima facie with anything that gets
I have
for the
nothing on
judicial
my calendar.
submissions.
I mean, I'm okay that way.
But an in-person meeting anytime
I'm all right, except
I'll be
for-
traveling the
mid-September.
state,
Then, how about the 28th?
doing math.
Wednesday,
That's
August
fine.
28th?
How does that work for you?
Fine.
28th? How does that work for everybody?
August?
August 28th. We'll schedule
So
it.
12 noon WebEx,
Or-
we
or
can
in
post that
person,
out there.
However you want to do
Well,
it.
whichever way, okay.
Whichever way you want to
Right.
do it, but.
Or for those of you who come.
I mean, if you want to have a full meeting, I'm okay with that. I don't know if you don't think there'll be anything else
I would
going on?
prefer not.
You prefer not, okay. So 28th noon.
And then I'd probably anytime middle of September, or, when do you want to, we need to have a meeting by December 13th.
That's the next.
Well,
In order to certify,
Cover that.
I think
in
we'll
order
do
to
that.
certify the election results, and then how do you want to handle September, October, November is certainly,
Let's all go to the hearings on public finance.
and then we want to make sure we free up some time to go to Kim's hearing.
So you want us to put in our calendars now the 12th or the 13th of December? 13th is a Friday, the 12th is a Thursday.
Right, by law, you have to meet not later than the 15th, which is Sunday. That means we got at least Friday.
12th would be better.
12
12th
always
is better.
All right, so we're gonna block out the 12th right now for,
12th of September?
right.
December.
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 We're working backwards.
12th of December, just because that's required, so it's
Right.
gonna be in our calendars and we
Gotta
will
have it.
schedule around it.
Well, how about this then? We'll do the 28th meeting. I mean, can we talk about September then, or do you want to?
If necessary, you
If
might not
necessary.
need it,
Okay.
so.
You
Because
should,
September's not a great month for me.
No,
frankly, but
I'm,
I'll do it if we have to. If not, we'll definitely do one in October if we don't do September.
it's
It'll
up
be
to you
fine.
when you want to meet.
Fair enough.
That's why I laid out,
The sooner though we pick these dates.
The sooner the better.
the 28th is
The
good for us.
election
'cause-
commissioners conference is September
It is.
2nd to
It
September.
is, right. So there's the conference up in Saratoga.
Third through the
Third through the
6th,
sixth.
Through the 6th, okay.
And
The 2nd is
Yep.
Labor Day.
Yep.
Okay.
So,
Labor Day is.
Or the
well,
Labor
whatever you
Day.
want to do.
So the 28th will allow us to certify any races that we have to certify for the general.
28th of
What are you talking about?
That will allow us to,
Oh, we're still in
Yeah.
August. Okay.
this August 28th day is fine. Anytime that you want to meet, September, October, November is up to you.
Okay.
If you want to divide them, hold 2 during that period of time, whatever number you want.
Well, can we, you wanna talk about it, or you wanna do it now?
I'm flexible.
I'd like to do it now.
Okay, let's try to do that. Well, it would be good if I could push it to the 1st of October, but if we can't, I'll do September.
I'm good.
I'll do what we have to do,
But I could always call in, which I prefer not to do.
of course.
I'm good at the end of September.
End of September is okay.
Yeah, I can't, well, that's bad for me, but again, I'll do it if we have to. I'll accommodate.
The 26th?
Do the first week in October if you want to.
I think that's bad for Andy.
No,
Yeah, that, you know,
all right, that's all right.
let's do it. I'll go ahead. I'm,
How about if we pick the 3rd of October?
no, I'm just, let's just do it. Get the date you guys want, and I'll work it out.
How's the 3rd of October?
So,
Can we try that?
Oh, wait a minute.
That's bad for you?
Let me just check on
No,
that.
that's the only date that's not good. I didn't
Right.
even call in on that.
Second or first?
I am.
These are the busiest
How about the
retired
second?
men I've ever
I
seen.
am.
They're up.
No.
All right, that week's okay.
Second.
I'm not
Amended.
available the
That's okay.
8th.
Okay, let's do the 2nd of October.
okay.
2nd of October?
That's
Am I
good.
retired?
Okay, let's do 2nd of October
Is
is
a
tentative.
full
Thank you, Tom.
That'll be a full board meeting.
meeting.
Yeah,
Full
yeah.
meeting.
The other one will be whatever we
Whatever's-
need to
whatever-
clean up the
whatever we need
ballot.
to do. Okay.
And then you can decide if you want to do anything.
And we're gonna pencil in December 12th also.
And that's penned in.
That's not.
Pending, that's pending, that's even better.
Tentative.
So penned is October 2 and December 12th, pencil is
Pending is October 2?
No.
Is that what you said?
No.
penned, penned, in ink.
Plus the pencil, okay.
There you go.
And if something comes up, of course,
Trace bean.
let us know and we'll,
Well, that's why I don't know if there are so little that will come here for judge in the first place. There might be nothing. That's why it's easier to cancel a meeting than it is for us to come to you at the last minute trying to.
right.
It does.
True.
Saratoga's nice in the summer.
There's always Saratoga.
Too much traffic.
Okay,
No,
then
the
I
track's
think we're
over.
done. I'll make a, well,
You want to, I think we set up, what room is,
The library.
so that they can take the cameras down, so if you're gonna do executive session.
yeah, and I
do it
don't
in
care
the
who
library.
comes to it, I just want a couple minutes to talk about the
Well,
litigation.
then let's just go to.
I do it right here. if
Let's
it-
just go.
No,
to
the cameras
That's
are
what I
guys.
thought.
Oh,
Let's just
Okay.
walk into
We could just go to the
Okay.
law library next door.
Okay, they're set up in the library.
Yeah.
Let's just go stop there.
And I'd like to have,
Motion to adjourn?
Just
you know, you guys here.
We're not.